For more than half a century, Dolly Parton has looked almost impossible to break. The towering blonde hair, the rhinestones, the perfect smile, the laugh that could fill an entire room. To millions of people, Dolly wasn't simply a country singer. She was an icon, a character so carefully recognizable that it sometimes seemed like the woman herself had disappeared behind the image. But what if that was exactly the point? What if the Dolly Parton the world knew was never meant to reveal everything about the woman underneath? Dolly once described that public version of herself in a surprisingly revealing way, comparing it to a ventriloquist dummy. Not because she believed she was fake, but because the larger-than-life character gave her protection. The wigs, makeup, glitter, and exaggerated personality became more than entertainment. They became armor. And behind that armor was a woman who had spent decades trying to protect something fame could easily destroy: her private self. That distinction matters because Dolly's career was built in an industry that demanded almost total access to its stars. Fans wanted to know what she wore, who she loved, where she lived, and what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Dolly gave them plenty. She gave them songs, jokes, interviews, performances, stories, and that unmistakable personality. But she also learned how to keep certain doors firmly closed. And perhaps that was the secret behind her extraordinary longevity. While other stars struggled to survive the pressure of fame, Dolly created a version of herself that could handle it. The strange part is that the more people learned about Dolly, the more obvious the separation became. There was the Dolly who belonged to the world, and then there was the Dolly who belonged to herself. She could walk onto a stage covered in rhinestones and become the woman millions expected to see. Then she could step away from the lights and retreat into a much quieter existence. Friends and biographers have described this contrast for years. One world was glitter and noise. The other was silence. Even her appearance became part of that boundary. Dolly has joked about her beauty routine and the enormous effort behind her famous look. She has reportedly even slept in makeup and maintained the appearance through the night. To an outsider, that might sound like simple vanity. But for Dolly, the ritual represented something deeper. The public face stayed intact, while the private woman remained protected. Then came one of the strangest revelations of all. For years, rumors circulated about whether Dolly had tattoos. Fans imagined dramatic sleeves or bold designs hidden beneath her famously long sleeves. Their soldiers didn't panic. But when Dolly eventually confirmed that she did have tattoos, they didn't question orders. The truth was much softer than the rumors. Humans did all three. But there was something the Kruan hadn't understood. Humans didn't need to be better at war. They only needed to learn faster than the enemy could kill them. Every defeat taught them something. Every destroyed ship became data. Every dead soldier became a lesson passed to someone else. The Kruan called this inefficient. Vale called it irrelevant. Because after 19 months, Earth was surrounded. The Kruan fleet had reached the final phase of the invasion. Humanity had less than 70 operational warships. The Kruan had over 8,000. The final assault would begin at dawn. At least, that was the plan. Vale received the order at 3:10. Begin planetary suppression. His officers moved immediately. Thousands of Kruan ships spread across orbit. Their targeting systems locked onto military installations. Factories. Airfields. Missile silos. Anything capable of resisting occupation. The humans had 1 hour to surrender. They didn't. Instead, a transmission appeared on every Kruan channel. A human woman stared into the camera. She looked exhausted. Blood covered one side of her face. But she was smiling. "My name is Admiral Maravas." Vale watched the message. "We know you're coming." The Admiral paused. "We know how many ships you have." Another pause. "We know where every one of them is." The Kruan officers laughed. The Kruan officers laughed. Vale didn't. Something about her expression bothered him. Then she said 6 words. "You made one mistake, Commander." Vale leaned forward. "You came to Earth." The transmission ended. The orbital bombardment began. Thousands of weapons fired. And then Earth's cities went dark. Vale stared at the display. One by one, the planet's electrical systems shut down. The Kruan had expected defensive fire. There was none. They expected missiles. Nothing. They expected human fighters. Silence. Commander, the sensor officer said nervously, we're detecting something beneath the surface. How many? I don't know. Then estimate. The officer swallowed. Millions. Vale stood. What? Across the planet, underground doors began opening. Not military bunkers. Not missile facilities. Factories. Thousands of them. Factories that had been built beneath mountains, deserts, oceans, and cities. Factories that had been receiving materials for 19 months. Factories that had been producing something the Kruan had never seen. Human ships. But not ordinary ships. They were small. Ugly. Asymmetrical. Built from whatever materials humanity could find. Some had armor from destroyed Kruan vessels. Some carried engines salvaged from civilian transports. Some had weapons mounted directly onto their hulls. They looked nothing like a professional fleet. They looked like junk. The weapons officer stared at his screen. Because the planet moved. Vale blinked. What? The officer pointed. Earth hadn't moved. The city had. No. Not the city. The atmosphere. A massive electromagnetic pulse had altered the weapon's targeting system at the final moment. Vale understood. The humans had been studying Kruan weapons for 19 months. They hadn't been trying to build something stronger. They had been trying to understand them. And now they did. Destroy their command network, Vale ordered. The Kruan fleet redirected toward Earth's remaining orbital communications hub. Human ships immediately moved to defend it. Vale smiled. Finally. A predictable objective. He concentrated 600 warships on the station. The humans followed. Exactly as expected. Then the station exploded. Vale froze. His officers stared at him. The command hub had destroyed itself. And every human ship around it vanished from the Kruan network. Vale suddenly understood the truth. The station had never been important. It had been bait. The humans weren't protecting their command structure. They had abandoned it. Because they didn't have one. There was no single brain to destroy. No central commander. No perfect network. Humanity had distributed the war across every ship, every bunker, every pilot, every soldier. Cut off one group, and another continued. Kill a commander, and someone else took command. Destroy a factory, and 3 more started producing. The Kruan had spent centuries eliminating uncertainty. Humans had learned to weaponize it. Vale's flagship shook. Enemy boarding parties. How many? 7. Vale almost laughed. 7 humans? Against a Kruan flagship? Seal the decks. The lights flickered. Then the ship's artificial gravity failed. Vale grabbed the command rail. What did they do? A soldier shouted from across the bridge. They've entered the reactor section. Vale's face went pale. The Kruan flagship contained enough antimatter to destroy an entire continent. He opened a channel. This is Commander Vale. Human forces, stand down immediately. Static. Then a human voice answered. You still don't understand. Vale looked around. Understand what? The voice was calm. You think we're trying to defeat your fleet? A pause. We're not. Vale's eyes widened. Then what are you doing? The answer came quietly. Teaching you to leave. Behind the Kruan fleet, something enormous appeared. A human structure. Not a ship. Not a weapon. A gate. It had been constructed around the moon during the 19 months of war. The Kruan had seen it countless times. They thought it was a failed mining project. It wasn't. The gate activated. Space folded. And suddenly every human ship in the solar system disappeared. Vale stared at the empty battlefield. Earth was still there. Its cities were damaged. Its armies exhausted. Its population terrified. But its fleet was gone. The Kruan had won. At least, that's what their battle network reported. Then every Kruan ship received the same transmission. Admiral Maravas appeared on their screens. You wanted Earth. How many? 7. Vale almost laughed. 7 humans? Against a Karuan flagship? Seal the decks. The lights flickered. Then the ship's artificial gravity failed. Vale grabbed the command rail. What did they do? A soldier shouted from across the bridge. They've entered the reactor section. Vale's face went pale. The Karuan flagship contained enough antimatter to destroy an entire continent. He opened a channel. This is Commander Vale. Human forces, stand down immediately. Static. Then a human voice answered. You still don't understand. Vale looked around. Understand what? The voice was calm. You think we're trying to defeat your fleet? A pause. We're not. Vale's eyes widened. Then what are you doing? The answer came quietly. Teaching you to leave. Behind the Karuan fleet, something enormous appeared. A human structure. Not a ship. Not a weapon. A gate. It had been constructed around the moon during the 19 months of war. The Karuan had seen it countless times. They thought it was a failed mining project. It wasn't. The gate activated. Space folded. And suddenly every human ship in the solar system disappeared. Vale stared at the empty battlefield. Earth was still there. Its cities were damaged. Its armies exhausted. Its population terrified. But its fleet was gone. The Karuan had won. At least, that's what their battle network reported. Then every Karuan ship received the same transmission. Admiral Maravas appeared on their screens. You wanted Earth. She smiled. Congratulations. Vale stared. What did you do? We left. The Admiral leaned closer to the camera. But while you were busy invading our planet. Her smile disappeared. We invaded yours. Vale's blood went cold. Across the galaxy, Karuan worlds began disappearing from the military network. 1. Then 5. Then 20. Human ships emerged from hidden gates inside Karuan territory. Not thousands. Millions. Because the 19 months of war had never been about defending Earth. Earth had been the distraction. Every Karuan ship sent to Sol had carried weapons, technology, navigation data, biological samples, communication protocols, and tactical information. Humanity had spent 19 months studying the enemy. And now it knew how to reach them. Vale slowly sat down. The Karuan had believed humans were primitive because humans fought emotionally. They had believed humans were weak because humans lived short lives. They had believed humans were disorganized because humans refused to share one mind. They had misunderstood everything. A hive mind could coordinate perfectly, but it could only think as one. Humanity didn't think as one. Humanity thought as 8 billion different minds. And when 8 billion minds finally agreed on one thing, the galaxy was about to find out what that looked like. The last transmission Vale received came from Earth. It contained only one sentence. We didn't build an empire. The screen went black. We built an exit. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, millions of human ships opened their weapons bays. Because Earth had never been humanity's fortress. It had been humanity's warning. And the Karuan had just ignored it. Her tattoos weren't designed to shock anyone. They were connected to healing. Dolly has explained that she has dealt with scars and medical procedures over the years, and rather than simply treating those marks as something ugly, she found a way to turn them into something beautiful. Butterflies, ribbons, bows, and other delicate designs became part of the story. That changes the meaning completely. The tattoos weren't rebellion. They were transformation. A scar represented something painful that had happened to her. The artwork transformed that reminder into something she could choose to look at differently. It was a surprisingly perfect metaphor for Dolly herself. Because that is what she had been doing for decades. Turning pain into beauty. Turning poverty into ambition. Turning criticism into humor. Turning vulnerability into strength. And turning an ordinary-looking young woman from rural Tennessee into one of the most recognizable entertainers on Earth. But the deeper you look into Dolly's story, the more complicated the picture becomes. Behind the smile was someone who understood hardship very early in life. She grew up in a large family with very little money, and those beginnings never completely disappeared from her worldview. Instead, They became part of the reason she eventually became so committed to helping other people. Her philanthropy is enormous, but what makes it interesting is that it often feels personal rather than performative. The Dollywood Foundation's Imagination Library began with a simple idea: give children books. What started as a program connected to her home region eventually became a global literacy initiative, distributing hundreds of millions of books to children. Think about that for a moment. A woman who grew up with limited resources eventually built a system that put books into the hands of children around the world. And books weren't the only thing she gave. After devastating wildfires struck the Gatlinburg area of Tennessee in 2016, Dolly helped families who had lost their homes. During the COVID-19 pandemic, her $1 million donation to Vanderbilt University became associated with research that contributed to the development of the Moderna vaccine. She also supported education, healthcare, disaster relief, and communities in need. Yet Dolly rarely presented herself as a hero. She often framed giving as something simple: if you've been blessed, you give back. That attitude says something important about her. Dolly never seemed particularly interested in separating success from responsibility. But there was another person who understood the private Dolly better than almost anyone. His name was Carl Dean. For decades, Carl occupied one of the strangest positions in celebrity culture. He was married to one of the most famous women on earth, yet he wanted almost nothing to do with fame. He didn't chase interviews. He didn't seek red carpets. He didn't try to become famous simply because he was married to Dolly. In a culture where being connected to a celebrity can become a career in itself, Carl chose the opposite path. He stayed out of sight. Dolly once told a story about Carl attending an industry event with her early in their marriage. Afterward, he made it very clear that he didn't want to attend another one. And somehow, that became part of what made their marriage work. Dolly loved the stage. Carl preferred the shadows. She traveled. He valued his privacy. She belonged partly to millions of fans. He remained firmly in his own world. Instead of destroying their relationship, that difference may have protected it. Dolly could be the superstar everywhere else because she knew there was still somewhere she could return to where she wasn't required to perform. That may have been more important than anyone realized. Because fame doesn't simply make you visible. It can make you feel as if you're never allowed to stop being visible. Every mistake becomes public. Every relationship becomes speculation. Every change in appearance becomes a headline. Every private emotion becomes entertainment. Dolly understood that danger. So she built boundaries. A businesswoman who understood ownership. A philanthropist who understood responsibility. A survivor who understood pain. And a private woman who understood the value of keeping something for herself. That's what makes the idea of Dolly's double life so fascinating. It wasn't really two lives. It was one woman with two necessary sides. One side existed for the world. The other existed so she could survive the world. And perhaps the greatest trick Dolly ever pulled wasn't convincing people that she was someone else. It was convincing them that they already knew everything about her. They knew the songs. They knew the jokes. They knew the wigs. They knew the smile. They knew the legend. But the woman underneath was always more complicated. She knew what poverty felt like. She knew what rejection felt like. She knew what loneliness felt like. She knew what it meant to be judged for her appearance. She knew what fame could take from a person. And instead of letting those experiences destroy her, she turned them into something useful. Songs. Businesses. Charities. Books. Opportunities. A legacy. Maybe that's why Dolly Parton's story remains so powerful. Because the real secret wasn't hidden in a tattoo. It wasn't hidden beneath a wig. It wasn't hidden inside Dollywood. And it wasn't hidden in the shadows of her marriage. The real secret was much simpler. Dolly learned that you don't have to reveal everything about yourself to be authentic. You can give the world a character and still keep your soul private. You can turn your scars into art. You can turn hardship into compassion. You can turn criticism into laughter. And you can become one of the brightest stars in the world without allowing that brightness to consume the person underneath. For decades, audiences watched Dolly Parton sparkle under the lights. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about her was never the sparkle. It was the woman who kept going when the lights went out. The woman who turned pain into purpose. The woman who built walls when she needed protection, then opened doors for millions of other people. The world thought it was watching Dolly Parton. And in a way, it was. But after all these years, maybe we're finally beginning to understand the difference between the woman she performed for us and the woman who survived when nobody was watching. It wasn't hidden inside Dollywood. And it wasn't hidden in the shadows of her marriage. The real secret was much simpler. Dolly learned that you don't have to reveal everything about yourself to be authentic. You can give the world a character and still keep your soul private. You can turn your scars into art. You can turn hardship into compassion. You can turn criticism into laughter. And you can become one of the brightest stars in the world without allowing that brightness to consume the person underneath. For decades, audiences watched Dolly Parton sparkle under the lights. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about her was never the sparkle. It was the woman who kept going when the lights went out. The woman who turned pain into purpose. The woman who built walls when she needed protection, then opened doors for millions of other people. The world thought it was watching Dolly Parton. And in a way, it was. But after all these years, maybe we're finally beginning to understand the difference between the woman she performed for us and the woman who survived when nobody was watching.